Okay, so the next part of the presentation, and this is the part that's kind of tied into the giveaway as well, is we're going to take a look at another plugin, a photorealistic rendering plugin for SketchUp called Shaderlight. We're going to look at using Shaderlight to create a photorealistic rendering of this same kitchen. So believe it or not, this is the exact same SketchUp model we were just looking at. So I'm going to show you how you can make the materials look a little bit more realistic, add some lighting, and then render the kitchen so that it looks more real. And again, we're going to be using the Shaderlight plugin for that. In order to find that plugin, you can again just sort of go back to the web and just do a quick Google search for Shaderlight. And from the Shaderlight website, you can either download a free trial copy of the plugin or purchase a pro version of the plugin for about 200 bucks. Here's how Shaderlight works. Shaderlight's actually pretty awesome. Again, a fairly simple toolbar, but incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. There's a few things I like about Shaderlight. I've been using it now for a couple of months, and one of the things I like about it are actually the limited number of options. It does such a good job with the options that it has available. For example, with some of the different lighting options. There's 5 different lighting types for different kinds of lights that you can add to your model. Point lights, spotlights, and area lights are the ones that I use most often. One of the coolest lighting types is an IES web profile light. Anyone here familiar with the IES file format? It's pretty slick. So what a lot of lighting companies are starting to do is they're starting to take their light fixtures, put them into neutral environments, and map the type of light that the fixture gives off. Its fall off, the shape of the light, how the light is sort of being cast from the fixture. And they have a way now of capturing that information and putting it into a file type, which means that you now as the designer can load that lighting information into the Shaderlight rendering plugin, and that light will then give off those exact same types of properties: color, shape, fall off. Really, really cool stuff. And pretty straightforward. All you do is select the IES web profile light and then bring in that IES file from the lighting companies. A lot of lighting companies, if you go to their websites, you go to the professional section of the lighting company's website, you'll see that they just have these IES files that you can download for free. And this is why. It's so that you can take those IES profiles and put them into rendering software and have those lights look the way that they're supposed to look, without having to try to figure that all out or guess on your own what it's supposed to look like. So there's that. My favorite kind of light to use in Shaderlight, though, are the area lights. So let's set up a light. The way this works is I'm basically just going to go into SketchUp. I'm going to work kind of fast here. And I'm actually going to go ahead and delete the stuff that I already have in here first. So this is where we're going with this. I'm just going to draw a quick box and add some lights. So just get rid of the stuff that's in there first, and then make it happen. So this is what I would do if I was going to get this together and render this model. And I only have about 10 minutes left, but I think I can pull it off. I think I can pull off a photorealistic rendering of this thing in about the next 10 minutes. So I'm going to start with SketchUp's rectangle tool. And in order to work a little bit faster, I'm going to use some keyboard shortcuts. So if anything that I'm doing doesn't seem like it makes sense or seems like it's just magic that's happening, stop me and let me know, and I can kind of back up and at least let you know what it is exactly that I'm doing. So here I'm using SketchUp's push-pull tool to quickly draw a big box that's just enveloping this whole kitchen. I'm going to take that box and sort of turn it inside out so that the white sides of that box are facing. So I've kind of got white walls now all around the kitchen. And I'm just going to bring these walls in a little bit so that they fit the shape of the kitchen that I'm working on. And again, here all I'm doing is using the rectangle tool and the push-pull tool, and I'm just getting this all so that the walls kind of fit a little bit tighter onto the space. I'm going to take these walls and select them and then just put them into a group so that they're sort of their own thing, and then go into edit group mode. I mentioned before that I really like area lights because I think the renderings tend to look a little bit better if they have kind of this just natural daylight type of a feel. I tend not to worry too much about individual specific fixtures and how those fixtures may be working in different places in the kitchen because it takes a long time. Whereas if we can just say, hey, what if it was during the day and a bunch of light was coming in through that big window that's right across from the kitchen? And area lights kind of help you to pull that off. So here I've just drawn a big rectangle, and I'm going to go in and get rid of that face. So I've basically created, in some ways, sort of like a giant window. And from here we can go over to Shaderlight's lighting tool, choose the option for an area light, set the intensity level of that light. I'm going to put a couple of lights in, and I don't want the whole room to get super blown out. If I was only going to put one light in, I'd probably crank that one light all the way up. But when you start to add a couple of lights, there's sort of an additive effect that might wash it all out. So I'm going to crank it down a little bit. I'm going to bring it down to about an intensity level of about 90. And then with the area light tool, I'm just going to draw a big, giant light that's going to come in through that window. That's pretty much it. I'm going to add another one over here so that we get some light in over by the wine bar. Same thing, draw a rectangle, delete the rectangle, come in with the area light tool, set the intensity, and then just plot that light down in there. There's a directionality to these lights. Okay, so when we look really close, you can kind of see that the light is pointing in. The thing that determines that directionality is the direction in which you draw the light. If you draw the light from left to right, like I was doing here, the light will point away from you. If you draw the light from right to left, the light will point towards you. Does that kind of make sense? So here we go, and I'm going to draw from left to right. And you can see that there's this big yellow or orange, I don't know if you can see that, there's this sort of yellow or orange directional arrow that's pointing and letting you know. So if it doesn't look like it's going to go the right way, you can just hit escape, which will cancel that light, and then go the other way from right to left, and you can see it's pointing the opposite direction. So that's how that works. Again, I just need to set intensity and then draw that in there. Okay, so 2 lights, off to a pretty good start. The next thing I really like to do with the Shaderlight plugin, I'm going to go to the scene tab I have here so I can just get back to the inside of the model, are make a couple of big moves with materials. Shaderlight allows you to add things like reflectivity or sort of a more textural, sort of bumpy kind of a feel to a material. And so rather than sit here and try to spec out the properties for every single material in the entire file, if you can just make a couple of big moves, that's going to have a dramatic impact on the overall feel of the rendering. So what I like to do is hit things like the countertops, which are usually some of the shiniest, most reflective surfaces in the model, and things like the floor too, because that just gives it that level of depth. And then I'll kind of show you how Shaderlight pretty much just takes care of the rest of it. So here we go, material tool, right? Again, part of the beauty of this tool, in my opinion, are the limited number of options that you have available to you. With the material window open, we take SketchUp's paint bucket and press the Command key on a Mac or the, I think it's Alt key on a PC, to sample a material from within the model. And when you sample that material, it loads into the Shaderlight material dialog box and allows you to then set properties for that specific material. So here I want to give it a polished, shiny finish, and you can see the little render ball up at the top updates automatically to give you a sense of what that material is kind of going to look like within the context of its environment. So we go shiny, maybe smooth 1, smooth 2. Those are the 2 that I tend to use for like polished stone countertops because they look kind of reflective, which is great, but not too reflective, not like a mirror, you know? And then the bumpiness, we'll show that on the floor, but here with the countertop, because it's such a smooth surface, you don't really want it to have any kind of bumpiness. So we won't worry about that for right now. It's just 2 checkboxes, shiny and polished. Smooth. And from there we can kind of skip over to the floor. So again, I'm in the paint bucket tool, pressing the command key on a Mac, I think it's the alt key on a PC, to pull that flooring material into the materials dialog box. With the floor, kind of more of a satin finish, right? Not glossy, not super reflective. If you look at floors, it tends not to be a perfect mirrored reflection unless you have like a really high polished wood or stone floor. But most of these wood finishes that have more of a matte finish, kind of a satin finish, the way the light carries across it is sort of, I guess, a bit softer, right? Not as crisp. And the reflections tend to be just sort of like, you know, they have about 6 or 7 inches worth of reflection. So a table leg is only going to show a little bit of the table leg and not the whole thing. So kind of a medium satin finish ought to do pretty well. And with floors, that's where maybe you do want to start to take a look at giving it a little bit of a bumpiness. So that things like the seam lines in that floor, if they actually do come down with tile, especially like that grout kind of is a bit recessed, that's where you can use the bump setting to kind of give that material a little bit of that sense that it's not just this totally flat surface. So a really easy way to do that. With this floor in particular, there isn't really a lot of bumpiness, so I'm just going to give it a little bit, but not a whole lot. I'm going to crank it down to about 0.5. What bump does, I don't know how many of you guys are really familiar with bump mapping, but what bump tries to do is it tries to look at the color information in a material, and it tries to assume that anything that's really bright is really bright because the light is hitting off of it and giving it a little bit of a reflection because it's sort of the frontmost part of the image. And anything that's really dark is probably kind of in the back. So what bump does is bump takes a flat two-dimensional image and it tries to take anything in that image that's really light or white and move it forward. And it tries to take anything that's really dark or black and push it back, so that the image kind of takes on a bit of a three-dimensionality in and of itself without you actually have to model, without you having to model that three-dimensionality. If you crank bump up in a positive direction, that's exactly what it does. It brings white forward and black back. If you put it in a negative direction, it flips that on its head and pushes white back and brings dark forward. So if you have dark grout lines, bump it up. If you have white grout lines and you want those grout lines to kind of look recessed, crank it down in a negative direction. So we would go like -1 or -2 if we wanted those white grout lines to feel like they were going in. That all make sense? Cool. Awesome. So we've got the floor set up, we've got the counters set up, we've got a couple of area lights in there, and now we can just go to render settings. And there are a couple of interesting settings here that you definitely want to take note on. The first is the resolution. Most of the stuff that I tend to render, I'm going to render at least 1280 by 720. So it's at a 16:9 aspect ratio, so you get that cool kind of like widescreen vibe, especially if you're going to take those renderings and put them on a monitor to display or to present to clients. And that's a pretty solid resolution for most displays. Ideally, if you're presenting on a monitor, you're going to render the image at the same resolution as the display. Because if you render it at a lower resolution and then bring it up on a really high-res monitor, it's going to look kind of fuzzy. But if you can render the image at the exact same resolution that you're going to be displaying it on, it's going to look super crisp. If you render it more than that, it's kind of overkill. Maybe for printing it would be a good idea. You just want to crank it all the way up as high as you can. But since most of the presentations we give are digital or like virtual, online, or hooked up to a monitor, that's sort of what we do. So we set the resolution. I'm going to set it down just a little bit so we can render it a little bit faster. And then we have a quality slider. The quality slider is important because that's what really impacts the fidelity of kind of the edges, the quality of the light, the quality of the reflections. Shaderlight uses a rendering algorithm called ray tracing, and I'm not going to get into like the nerdiness of all of that, but what it basically does is it takes rays of light and shoots them off around the room and bounces them around. And when you start getting things like reflective surfaces and shiny materials and a lot of lights, the higher the level of quality, the more times it's going to bounce those rays around in the room. So if the light's coming from one source and you're rendering it kind of at a low quality, it's going to hit a wall, maybe bounce off it once, and then that's kind of it. If you start cranking it up to higher levels of quality, it's going to bounce the light around a couple of times. So you start to pick up like ambient color, right? If you have a really white thing next to a really red thing, the white thing is going to kind of pick up a little bit of the red color that's bouncing off of the objects next to it. So that's where that level of realism really starts to come in. When you're rendering interior models, you definitely want to click on the interior setting. The GI that's in parentheses there stands for global illumination, and that again is where they really are bouncing a lot of rays of light around in a space and trying to get that ambient feel. I'm going to go with auto mode, which is going to render the whole thing at once. Artificial lights only. I'm not worried about a sun or anything like that. I'm just worried about those big area lights that I made. And then I'm fine with the SketchUp background, that's fine. So again, just a couple of quick settings: resolution, quality, and interior global illumination, especially for kitchens. And from there, we just click the render button. SketchUp's going to send the model over to Shaderlight. It's going to calculate the global illumination. It's going to start bouncing those rays of light around in the model. One of the things that's great about Shaderlight is that it's still connected to the SketchUp model. I don't want to show it because it'll screw up what's going on right now, but if I go back over into the SketchUp model and orbit, this rendering is automatically going to update and start rendering that other view. And as it's rendering, as it started rendering, you could tell whether or not it was what you thought it was going to be. You could tell whether or not the appliances were totally blown out, or if this corner over here was just too bright. You can start to see those things immediately. And if those things aren't what you had expected, shut it down, go back, make some adjustments, and start rendering it over again. If the view isn't quite what you thought it was going to be, if you're getting like a really weird reflection off of the glass doors because the window that you made was over here to the right, and that window is sending light in to where the view that you're looking at it, you're looking at that window or that glass, and all it's doing is bouncing this huge white block of light off of that glass. Shut it down, move the light over, and render it again. If the view isn't working, go back over into SketchUp, turn the model around, and the renderer just automatically start rendering a new image. There's sort of two rendering modes. I didn't talk too much about it because it wouldn't have made much sense without seeing it. But you can either render it in a way where it's going to render the entire image all sort of at once and slowly make it look clearer and clearer and clearer. I think quickly make it look clearer and clearer and clearer. Or you can render it in a mode where it'll just render one tile at a time, which really sucks if this tile is the one that has that really blown out corner because you've just waited for like, maybe 20 minutes or something for it to render a really high-res version of it. And then at the very end is where you go, oh, I didn't get the light right, or whatever, you have to do it all over again. I used a shiny material, a polished material for the legs. One of the presets for polished materials is chrome. So I just set that. In the model, you can see it's just a flat white. But in the material properties, I set it to a highly polished chrome. So it's actually rendering that white as a chrome material. And so just to kind of show you guys the higher resolution finished product that we did for this one. So this was the 1280 by 720, almost the highest level of quality, but not quite. It was one notch down from that. But yeah, it took maybe 15 minutes to set up, and this really high quality one, I will admit, took about 90 minutes to render. So I just clicked the render button last thing at the end of the day of work, came back tomorrow to that little Easter egg and was like, sweet, done, right?